Hi, it's me. Welcome to another new Limbus Company ID overview for Limbus Company's Season 7. This week saw the addition of the House of Spiders, the middle Nursefather Outis, who is a hybrid of Burn and Bleed. But don't let those statuses fool you, this is an NV Resonance ID before anything else, and an insanely good one at that. She's so good that you don't actually need any NV Res in order for her to be competent in Burn. Also, this ID has so much text on it that I'm going to be moving some of it around to make it easier to talk about. So that's why certain parts aren't going to look exactly how they're written in-game, but I promise I am going over stuff exactly how it works. Now with that out of the way, let's jump into her absolute monster of a kit. The House of Spiders, the middle Nursefather Outis' entire kit revolves around Levitain. It starts off combat as Sealed Sword, then gradually removes seals until the sword is fully unleashed as you play into her gimmicks, and we'll get to that in a moment. All stages of the sword allow her to deal up to 10% more damage with her base skills based on the target's bleed, but once the first seal is removed it also counts the target's burn. Sealed Sword grants 2 haste every turn end, and that becomes 1 haste if the first or second seals are removed. Lastly, the final coin of her base skills deals 10% of the final coin's damage as bonus damage if the target has 20 or more bleed, and that also counts burn if a seal has been removed, and that damage type changes depending on how many seals are removed, being blunt when no or 1 seal are removed, slash if the second seal is removed, and pierce if all seals are removed. Levitain also gains 2 additional effects once fully unsealed, being that it inflicts 3 burn potency to all units at every turn start, and that it changes all of Outis' skills to alternative variants, and that change can happen mid-turn if she has multiple skill slots. Those changed skills are significantly more powerful than her original base skills, so getting to fully unseal her sword is going to be your main game plan with her. So how do you actually unseal the sword? Well, that revolves around her Rising Fever effect. She gains 1 Rising Fever at encounter start, then 2 more each time a seal is removed, except for the final one. Once per turn, she will lose 1 Rising Fever if you either use her skill 3, even as a counter, or at turn end with 6 or more NV Absolute Resonance. The only downside is that you can only lose 1 per turn, so it takes a minimum of 5 full turns for her to fully ramp up. Once she has 0 Rising Fever, she will use the Time to Unpack skill either immediately if it hits 0 from using a skill, or at the next combat start if she was unable to use the skill at skill end. She'll also use it regardless of her Rising Fever if she still has Sealed Sword upon dropping below 80% HP, which is pretty unlikely since you just need to use her skill 3 once. Time to Unpack is a 4 to 16 rolling blunt envy skill with 4 unbreakable coins. While she has the middle Vengeance tattoo, an effect that we'll get to later, she deals 25% of each coin's damage as slash damage to the target, and after using it, a seal is removed from Levitain. As a free skill, this deals a ridiculous amount of damage, and it also inflicts Envy Fragility next turn on the final coin, meaning teams that are heavy on Envy, or the ones you want to use this ID in, will have a much higher damage potential. The extremely high damage of the ID also translates to this skill, making it a really good source of extra damage every time that it's used, especially when she has tattoos. Once fully unsealed, Levitain also activates an additional passive. When an ally with 20% or less HP remaining, or if it's middle Ishmael, 30% HP or less, loses a clash, Outis will immediately call them a good girl and use an additional skill that targets both the ally and the enemy who they lost a clash against. This will usually kill them, and will grant 1 NV damage up next turn if it kills an ally from the middle, or grant Avenging My Family if she kills middle Ishmael. This additional skill can only activate once per encounter. Avenging My Family does not go away over time. It makes Envy skills deal 20% more damage, and gives all of Outis' base skills 1 final power. While this is a good buff, it is insanely difficult to actually trigger, and losing Ishmael, who's one of the best damage dealers in NV Resonance, especially with Outis alongside her, makes it almost definitely not worth it. Good Girl, Your Sacrifice for the Family Won't Be Forgotten, is a 16 to 18 rolling blunt NV skill with a single unbreakable coin and 2 attack weight, but can become up to a 22 to 24 if the main target has enough burn and bleed, and Outis has enough tattoos. The main target will always be the enemy that the ally lost to. It will always deal at least neutral physical damage, deals 100% of its final damage as blunt damage, and deals 100% more damage if middle Ishmael is the sub-target. It's also an alternative way to consume the middle grudge to make more tattoos, and can give up to 15 grudge back after being used if it kills an ally, which it probably will if they're that low on HP. It's a nice little skill for a bunch of extra damage, but since the first turn it can be activated on is turn 6, you're really unlikely to use it. And since we're talking about tattoos, let's talk about her fueled passive next, one that is too long for me to fit into the passive box, so I'll leave a timestamp for it in the passive box instead. At the end of every turn, she'll inflict Vengeance Mark to the enemy who hurt allies the most, just like all middle units, but she'll also inflict Book of Vengeance the House of Spiders to the enemy who specifically dealt the most damage to her. It makes it so that Outis and her apprentice Ishmael heal 5 SP on hitting the target that has it, and also makes it so that both herself and Ishmael gain 1 more stack of the middle grudge when being hit by that enemy. Both of these effects are once per skill but twice per turn, and it encourages both Outis and Ishmael to take a lot of damage in order to inflict this effect and gain more grudge next turn. And speaking of the middle grudge, Outis' variation of this effect is identical to Ishmael's, increasing her damage against targets with Vengeance Mark by 20%. Gaining grudge is important for upping her overall damage. You gain up to 7 on combat start based on your Envy Resonance, then gain 2 whenever either middle Outis or middle Ishmael are hit twice per turn. Then, for each other middle or House of Spiders ally who gets hit, she gains an additional 1 once per turn for each of those allies. The amount she gains is always increased by 1 when that unit that gives it to her also has Vengeance Mark as well. And one last additional bit, when Outis is hit, it also gives Ishmael 2 grudge, so they really help each other to ramp up in this regard once the passive is fueled. She also gains 15 grudge immediately and becomes unstaggered at turn end if she gets staggered during combat, and this is her only source of grudge that you don't need to fuel her passive for. She also only has 1 stagger threshold, so this is essentially saying that she can barely be staggered at all, which is really nice. The payoff for this is gaining 1 the middle Vengeance Tattoo Great Sister for every 5 grudge that Outis spends. This stacks up to 10, makes Envy and Blunt skills deal 5% more damage per stack, and gives 1 final power to her base skills for every 5 stacks. This is a lot of extra damage, and if you're using her skill 3 as a counter, it will ramp up surprisingly quickly since her skill 3 is also the main skill that consumes grudge. The more important payoff is that it will replace this skill with her skill 3 on the dashboard if she has 15 grudge at turn start, unless her bottom left slot already has a skill 3 in it. Not only is this your best way to spend grudge, but it's also the skill you need to use in order to reduce Rising Fever, which means that it will make it so that unsealing your sword is something you can do without needing to counter most of the time. But again, that skill deals way more damage as a counter, so your mileage may vary. Oh, and this part isn't in her field passive, so getting staggered before activating her passive somehow will still give you a free skill 3 and a free 15 grudge to consume. And while we're talking about her synergy with middle Ishmael, let's also not forget that Outis' mommy, her father, I guess? Outis gains 1 check this out kiddo on winning a clash, 1 more if it's the first skill she used that turn, and 1 more on hitting an enemy with a coin that isn't cracked. Ishmael gains the exact same effect, except she also gains an additional stack of her effect, I Got Praised, if the hit was from her skill 3 used as a counter. Both of these effects are identical, stacking up to 10, reducing by 1 after being hit by 2 skills, increasing blunt skill damage by 1% per stack, and giving 1 final power to base skills at 5 or more. This is a pretty small buff overall, but them giving these IDs an actual reason to clash is really nice, even if those clashes will probably be less damage than using their counters overall. The fact that they need to get hit by 2 skills also means that their counters are still net positive to gain these effects, which is really good. Getting tired of passives yet? Too bad. Once she drops below 50% HP, she gains 3 Ridiculous Grit, which reduces by 1 at the end of every turn. It makes all of her weaknesses become neutral while she has it, and also makes her take 30 to 50% less damage from skills based on how many tattoos she has. She also heals up to 15 SP on winning a clash based on the clash count, and deals 10% more damage if she lost SP during the previous turn. This effect makes her very hard to kill, and the free SP recovery is actually really nice once Levitine is fully unsealed, since all of her skills will lose SP after they're used. But this ID is so bulky that she's the last unit I'd expect to randomly drop below 50%. It's still nice to make her much harder to kill for a few turns, though. Her support passive is technically insanely good. giving 1 damage up and 1 protection to all allies using counters that turn at combat start, but middle allies effectively get double that bonus in the form of envy damage up and protection instead. Even being only twice per encounter, this is really good. The problem is that the team who wants this most is the team that she'll be fielded in, which is a recurring issue with support passives these days, and it means you're unlikely to get much use out of it. And finally, when the Blade of the House of Spiders kills her, Ryoshu will gain 1 entanglement, take 20% less damage for the encounter, and gain 2 offense level up on being hit. All of this is honestly worse than the fact that this being a Nursefather ID means Ryoshu will gain 1 string severance, adding a coin to her best skill, which is still a pretty reasonable benefit to want to kill her for. Got all of that? Because we're moving on to skills now. Stomping is a 3-11 rolling blunt lust skill with 2 coins that can become up to a 3-15 based on the target's burn and bleed, and the second coin becomes unbreakable if she has tattoos. Much like all the other middle IDs, but not Merceau because he sucks for some reason, she heals SP when using this skill, which is definitely helpful if you don't want to bring her or don't have Heathcliff. The bit of stagger damage and bind infliction is also really nice, and the skill actually inflicts a good bleed count, making her the first middle ID who can do decent bleed infliction, despite all of them being bleed. It's also really important to use this skill at least once, since it is her only skill that is not Envy, and generating 1 Lust in an Envy Resonance team is necessary to be able to generate other types consistently. When Levitine is fully unsealed, it becomes I'll Gut You Like a Fish, a 3-11 rolling blunt envy skill with 2 unbreakable coins that can become up to a 3-15 based on the target's burn and bleed, and gains up to 3 offense level based on your highest resonance. The Levitine skills are just generally upgraded versions of the other skills, and this one seeming to inflict less bleed potency, but it's actually 1 more if she has tattoos, and she inflicts 1 paralyze in addition to the bind on the second coin. One effect all these skills will have in common though is giving Otis burn equal to the number of coins the skill has, and making her lose 5 SP after using the skill. They also tend to inflict a lot more burn than her original skills, which also helps with her damage and conditionals quite a bit. Don't Let Something Like This Break You is a 4-16 rolling blunt envy skill with 3 coins that can become up to a 4-22 based on the target's burn and bleed, gain up to 3 offense level based on your highest resonance, and have up to 3 unbreakable coins based on her amount of tattoos. Like Ishmael, her skills 2 and 3 begin to inflict burn once the first seal of her sword is removed, though this is a very small amount of bleed and burn, and this skill is her only one that gains aggro. It inflicts both bind and paralyze unconditionally, which is really solid, and the final coin deals bonus blunt damage based on the target's burn and bleed, which compounds with the effect of her sword itself for even more damage. It's a really good skill to clash with on turns where you don't necessarily want her to counter, but you still want to do Envy Resonance. When Levitine is fully unsealed, it becomes Gut Stab, a 3-18 rolling blunt envy skill with 5 unbreakable coins that can become a 4-19 if the target has enough bleed and burn, and gains up to 3 offense level based on your highest resonance. It loses the bonus damage on the final hit for some reason, meaning the damage in this case is not so much higher despite having 2 additional coins, at least before you take her various damage increasing statuses into account. That said, it actually inflicts burn and bleed count, and way more potency than the other skill, so it does end up being much better in the long run. Also, having a 5 coin skill too that doesn't require any conditionals to use that many coins is just insane. Quickly interjecting with her defense skill, Rule Violation is a 4-16 rolling blunt envy counter with 2 coins that gives shield based on her missing HP at combat start. It's a solid counter on its own, just like all middle IDs, it uses her skill 3 as a counter if you have 6 or more envy absolute resonance. This means it gains all the bonuses as a regular counter, plus the fact that it speeds up unsealing Levitine, so it's even more useful than other middle skill 3 counters as a result. You'll want to be doing that as often as you possibly can with this ID. Stamp of Vengeance is a 4-16 rolling blunt envy skill with 4 coins, the last being unbreakable, that can become up to a 10-26 based on the target's burn and bleed if you have 6 or more envy absolute resonance, and based on Otis's tattoos, and those tattoos also convert the coins to unbreakable. It gains up to 6 offense level based on your highest resonance, and grants 1 blunt damage up next turn if it gets used as a counter, which further incentivizes using it as a counter. It also inflicts a really good amount of bleed and burn. Overall, it's just incredibly good, and using it as often as possible to unseal Levitine is always going to be your priority. Once Levitine is unsealed, it becomes complete and total extermination. A 4-19 rolling blunt envy skill with 5 unbreakable coins that can become up to a 7-27 based on the target's burn and bleed and if she has tattoos. It also deals up to 40% more damage based on the target's burn and bleed, and the last coins deal a ton of bonus damage in all 3 physical damage types based on the target's burn and bleed as well. This is all on top of the bonuses that the other skill 3 is capable of gaining. So, the overall damage becomes absolutely absurd when fully ramped up. And since it's also usable as a counter, that number can become so much higher than you'd expect. For context, I used this skill as a counter, and the base power of the first coin ended up being 19. So you can imagine just how powerful it ends up being overall. Use it as a counter as often as possible, and this ID will absolutely dominate almost any fight she's in. When it comes to E.G.O, there's really only one that matters on this ID, and it's coincidentally the only one that she perfectly fuels. I'll go for Scissors, how about you, is the main way to get Sin resources that aren't Envy in an Envy Resonance team, and is the reason you need to use her skill 1 at least once since you need to fuel it. It being super cheap, being your most consistent source of HP healing for the team, and allowing you to easily use other E.G.O without needing to use anything other than Envy skills, makes it invaluable, plus it inflicts a lot of useful debuffs the team can take advantage of. Holiday is also nice to have, since it allows you to apply Envy damage up and heal the SP of allies in the team for the next turn, even if it isn't much. And since Outis is the only middle ID to gain haste, it's pretty likely to be the first skill in the chain, so it won't interfere with Absolute Resonance if you do use it. It also increases the amount of bleed and burn that Outis can inflict, sometimes. And while the corrosion is really expensive, it's also capable of inflicting Envy Fragility for even more Envy damage. Magic Bullet allows Outis to be able to inflict Dark Flame against enemies with 30 or more burn thanks to the passive, even if it isn't very much. And while you can never reset her Magic Bullet stack without her dying, the E.G.O itself is still pretty solid for inflicting larger amounts of Dark Flame and burn. It also just generally helps to inflict burn potency thanks to the passive. Would you be shocked to learn that the best team for this ID consists of all 5 other middle IDs, plus 1 more ID to take advantage of Envy Resonance? Ishmael is self-explanatory as the 2 of them together buff each other by quite a bit. Heathcliff allows the team to be a lot tankier, and makes it so that you can gain SP without needing to worry about clashing for the middle IDs, and his binds gives an insane amount of offense level to their counters. Heathcliff also speeds up the scaling of Sinclair, who deals a lot of damage with his counters, and has both Hexnail and Harmony to buff and heal himself and the rest of the team. Merceau provides more SP healing, as well as Electric Screaming, and both his base kit and that E.G.O are able to buff the abilities of ally envy skills and counters, and Don Quixote is the one with the least team support, but she still deals really solid damage, more than even Sinclair when using her counter as a skill 3. They're just an incredibly solid team just on their own, especially with the addition of this new Outis ID. The last member of the main team is almost certainly Lamp Gregor, despite his absolute lack of envy. He's so slow that he'll never interfere with your Envy Resonance, brings Garden of Thorns, which gives a ton of bonuses to Envy skills if you do 6 Envy Absolute Resonance, and takes good advantage of burn, so he also synergizes well with the middle in general for activating their conditionals. It's not to say they're the only team that can take good advantage of each other. You can make a pretty solid burn team with the addition of Heathcliff, Ishmael, and Outis by including Liu Yisang, Dawn Office Sinclair, and one of the other middle IDs, though your Envy Absolute Resonance is definitely not going to be as consistent since it requires Yisang's skill 3, sadly. Outis also has some strange synergy with self-burn IDs, mostly Heisho Heathcliff and Ardor Blossom Star Faust, but Heisho Sinclair does gain a little extra damage and consistency even though he can't gain burn count on his own. Increasing their burn gain helps to give them their more powerful skills faster, which is pretty nice, and Heisho Heathcliff is actually a great unit for Envy Resonance if you don't have middle Heathcliff. There's a lot of solid bleed IDs that pair well with the middle, including the ring IDs for Faust, Honglu, and Rodian, who all have Envy skill 2s and at least 1 Envy E.G.O, and they help a lot with inflicting more bleed for the team while being incredibly good damage dealers. Faust's support passive is also great for inflicting bleed in a team that doesn't field her, and inflicting burn to Rodian actually makes it so that her Hexnail E.G.O heals more to her allies. The combination of Prince Merceau and Princess Rodion is also really good if you want more bleed units, as they buff each other quite a bit, with Merceau being able to give allies the ability to heal, which helps the middle a decent amount once Rodion also has full hard blood armor, and Rodion just in general is a great support unit for them since Hexnail is a great option for healing, and the middle doesn't really have trouble fulfilling the NV Resonance to make that healing better. Red Eyes and Penitence Ryoshu is still great to bring in an NV Resonance as a hybrid bleed and charge unit, especially for her application as a healer for the team. Outis on her own can be run in a House of Spiders team as a sacrifice for Ryoshu, which will probably be her primary purpose for that team since most of her best effects will take far too long to reach without the ability to consistently do NV Resonance. And lastly, there are a ton of viable charge IDs that work well in NV Resonance teams as replacements for middle units if you need, even if they'll be slightly worse on average. AEDD Gregor is the best charge support unit in the game and can still provide benefits with Garden of Thorns. Reindeers, Rodion, and Honglu are great damage dealers, with Honglu being less consistent to build up, but more consistent for damage once he is built up. Multicrack Faust deals ridiculous damage with her skill 2 if you can get past her general inconsistency. In the Name of Love and Hate Don Quixote is the best charge damage dealer in the game, and the only one who specifically scales from NV Resonance. She's probably the only one of these units where you can argue it's better to bring her than her middle ID, though I prefer middle myself. And W. Corp Heathcliff is a fantastic tank who can consistently deal heavy damage with his skill 3, though his locked skill from his defense does mess with your resonance sometimes, which is a bit annoying. And that's about all I have to say about her. Overall, I was very happy to get this ID, even if it took this long into the season, and I'm a man of my word, so I will be starting work on an NV Res guide now. Outis is absurdly powerful, so strong that she feels on par with Blade of the House of Spiders when used in a full NV Resonance team, and I think that's pretty neat, since she's still pretty solid even outside of it. If you want to borrow her, I have her in my company like always. Be sure to like the video and subscribe as it helps me out a lot. Let me know what you think of her in the comments. Thank you for watching my video, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope to see you again soon.